Mhm.
Okay, welcome everyone to week 4 of this 9/10 week course. This week we're going to be looking at the major scale, okay, and subsequent things, subjects within that title. We've got tones and semitones. We're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at sharps, flats, and naturals, uh, collectively known as accidentals, and we're going to be looking at the scales of C, G, and F major. Okay, but before we go into that, I'm going to go over last week's worksheet because I forgot to do it last week, and I will never make that mistake again. So, where are we? Here we are. Okay, let me to do this. Okay, here we go. Where are we? Right, so here is the sheet with all the answers. So you can have a good look over that, and hopefully most of you will have got those, most of them correct.
Oh, no.
So actually, Ray, you sent me yours, didn't you? I saw
Yeah.
yours, and yours was about, I think, you got most of them correct. Most of them correct.
Good.
I
Very
think,
diplomatic.
yeah. The danger is with this sort of thing. I mean, there are a lot here. I mean, what we've got.
I found it quite difficult, to be
8,
honest.
9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so we've got like there's 84 notes there. So I mean, there's quite a lot. The danger is with this sort of thing when you're reading lots of notes at once. Sometimes it's quite easy to sort of misread a note or something. Just like you can misread words sometimes. The brain just kind of, if you have a little bit of a flicker, it can go a little bit funny sometimes. But it usually doesn't take very long to get the brain back on track. So halfway through the exercise, remember we had this. By the way, can you all see that little blue circle around my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So we had the bass clef, changes to bass clef, and so all those notes are in bass clef from that moment forward.
Right.
Yeah. So there we are. I purposefully put these big leaps in between the notes just to sort of get you to, so you didn't get too comfortable with reading notes that are next to each other, so you'd sort of be forced to go from a place that you know and work your way out from there. I did actually put quite a lot of these sort of C, so the same note twice but in a different octave. Wasn't to catch you out, it was just to sort of make you aware that
Possible.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, or you've got things like this one here, B and B. Like those two Bs there are 2 octaves apart because there's a B there in the middle. It should be a B there as well. Could be a B on that middle line. What else? There were. It's kind of really random, just random, really. Picked at random. Tried to get a good mix in there. There were ones that were up on 2 ledger lines, like this one here. So they didn't just go outside of the first ledger line. Are you all furiously marking your worksheets? Don't worry. So, I mean, if it's not that big a deal if you didn't get them all right. Like I said, it's easy to misread things sometimes, but it doesn't take you long to get back on track usually. I'll send this worksheet, the answers of this one out after this, and you can compare afterwards. So there we are. I hope that was a worthwhile exercise for you. There'll be plenty more of that sort of stuff as we go along because you're going to be, with subsequent worksheets from now on, you're going to be using, you're going to be reading notes as we go along. So anyway, the major scale. Now then, some of you may already be aware what a scale is, or what the major scale is, and you might even be aware of what different tonalities are, like major and minor. Some of you won't have a clue what I'm talking about, but that's okay. You will by the end of the session. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what scales are, why are they useful, and a little summary of different types of scales, different sorts of scales. We're only going to be focusing on one type of scale, but I'll give you an idea of what different types of scales there are. So first of all, I thought what I'd do is I'd go over I know it's not a very credible source at the best of times, but the Wikipedia entry for music theory, actually, with Wikipedia, I found is actually quite accurate. So the Wikipedia entry for scales, what they are, the definition. A scale is any set of musical notes ordered by fundamental frequency or pitch. Yeah. A scale ordered by increasing pitch is an ascending scale, and a scale ordered by decreasing pitch is a descending scale. So a scale that goes up like this, start from the bottom and go to the top, we would say it is an ascending scale, and then coming from the top down would be descending. I will probably refer to them in that way in the future. Often, especially in the context of common practice method, most or all of the melody and harmony of a musical work is built using the notes of a single scale, which can be conveniently represented on a staff with a standard key signature. Now, we'll be going over key signatures next week, so don't worry about that. Every single piece of music that you have ever listened to in your entire life, or sung, or played, is based on scales. Scales are the building blocks of music. They are the building blocks of harmony. They're the building blocks of melody. Like I said, there are loads and loads of different types of scales that create different sound worlds or different tonalities when it comes to different genres of music. Now, in Western music, we mainly use two types of scale. That is the minor scale and the major scale. Okay, and we call those two different types of tonalities major and minor. Now, most music is a mixture of those two different tonalities, major and minor. So to give you an example, a major chord sounds like this. Yeah. That's a major sound. And a minor sound would sound something like this. Okay. So you can hear a stark difference between those two tonalities. The first one, major, there, it's very bright, open, and the minor one, it's quite closed and it has a darker feel to it. Music is a mixture of those two tonalities. So why are scales useful? The reason that they are useful is because when it comes to understanding harmony, chords, and how harmony moves and music works, it's essential to understand how scales are built and know your scales quite well, because all harmony is based on scales. Everything is based on scales. When you get right down to the bottom, the bottom rung, it's all scales. It's all scales. So it's fitting that we sort of, we have a look at these and we study these in depth. So the first thing we're going to do anyway, there are a few things to sort of that you need to know before we start looking at the major scale. And the first thing is you need to know the difference between tones and semitones. Okay. Now, tones and semitones are intervals, what we call intervals. And intervals in music are, if I just grab up my resources, 2 seconds. Okay, here's tones and semitones. So, on a standard piano keyboard, like I said last week, you will see there are white notes and black notes. There and there. Now, a semitone is the distance from one key to the very next key, up or down. So from here to here is the interval of a semitone. So by that logic, there to there is also a semitone. And also by that logic, from there to there is also a semitone. There's no black key between those two notes to separate them. So they are right next to each other on the keyboard, meaning that they are a semitone apart. So are they. B and C, E and F, all these are all a semitone apart. You get the idea. A chromatic scale, what's called a chromatic scale, is built up of semitones. Just one note to the next, one note to the next, right next to each other all the way, and descending as well. All those intervals are semitones. Looking at this, let's find the semitones. There they are. Okay, so we've got C to C sharp, semitone. F to F sharp, or vice versa, F sharp to F, semitone. B flat to B, or B to B flat, interval of a semitone. Now then, the word semi means half. So if you put two semitones together, you're going to get a whole tone, or what we might call a full tone, a whole tone. Sometimes it's called a whole step. Sometimes semitones as well are referred to as half steps. Half a step. So if you put two half steps or two semitones together, you're going to get this. See how there's one missing one key in the middle there? That would be a whole tone or a full step. That's basically what tones and semitones are. Now, scales, there are lots of different types of scales, and they are all a mixture of tones and semitones. So, for example, there's one type of scale called a whole tone scale that uses only whole tone steps. And it sounds like this. It's kind of that sound that you often get in like dream sequences, you know, in films and stuff. Sort of dreamy sound. That's a whole tone scale. Like I just did before, there are scales that only use the interval of a semitone. And that's called a chromatic scale. Those are just two of many. But there we are. So when you move from one note on a piano keyboard, or sing one note to the next note, so you would be singing or playing semitones. Or whole tones, two semitones together, whole tone, and just one step is a semitone. Everyone okay with that?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So that's semitones and whole tones. Now then, the next thing I'm going to talk about is sharps, flats, and naturals. Now then, I have a sheet here that looks a little bit scary at first.
Woo.
I know. So what we really want to focus on here is the middle three. Okay, just ignore the outer two. We will come to those eventually, but not in the leg of this. Not in the time of this leg. So sharps, naturals, and flats. Okay. So you probably already guessed what natural means. A natural note is the note that is like just C. C natural would just be a C, or D natural would just be D. So nothing altered. E natural, G natural, as it just occurs on the keyboard. If I sharpen a note, so let's say, for instance, I want to sharpen D, okay? That means to move one step to the right, or one semitone rather, up in pitch. So I would go to here. And that would be D sharp. And I would write that like this. So let's go for this D here. There. You all see that okay? I'll do another one just there. D sharp. There it is. Now notice, and this is quite important, notice how the accidental, or the sharp, is to the left of the note. The accidental, sharp or flat or natural, always goes before the note. The reason for this is because when you are reading music, you see the sharp or the flat before you read the note. So rather than seeing the note and then seeing the sharp and going, oh, it's supposed to be sharp, you see it sharp D or flat B or something like that. Now, if I saw that note on a piece of music, I would know that it is going to be the D sharp there. If I saw this, however, that would be something different. That's a D flat. So if I saw that on a piece of music, I would know that the note is D, but it's D flat. So it's a flattened D, meaning that it goes down a semitone. Now in the context of a piano, this is really easy to visualize because you just see the note and then you go, oh right, it's one to the right. So I just go to the right by one or to the left by one if it's flat. If you're a violinist or a horn player or a singer for that matter, it's a little bit different because you have to use your ears down a semitone or up a semitone. So practicing singing chromatic scales or semitones is a really, really useful exercise because in choral music, or well, all music for singers especially, you do see a lot of semitones. And it's really useful to know how to sing them, you know, to know what sound you're looking for. So there we are. Sharps mean to go a semitone up. Flats mean to go a semitone down. And a natural means to just play or sing the normal note. Now, if I had a D flat occurring in a bar, and then I wanted the next note to be a D natural, I would have to naturalize that note. So I would put a natural sign before it. And what that does is it cancels out the flat or the sharp, and it makes the note natural again. So in this case, what we have is a D flat and then a D natural. Okay, and if I wanted to make, if I wanted to do a D sharp after that, I would just put a sharp in front of it. Nice and easy. So here, D flat, D natural, D sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question there, Danny?
Of course you can, Ray.
Why wouldn't you just leave it as it is? The natural note. The natural. Leave it as it is, like, because I would have read that as a natural note.
Like that, you mean? With no thing. So the reason for that is because when you flatten or sharpen a note, the note that occurs after it is automatically sharpened or flattened as well. So this D here, which is a D flat, that means that because it's in the same bar, this D is also flat. Okay? And when you go into the next bar, what that does is it automatically cancels any sharps and flats. So if I get rid of that, you see how it's just just naturalized it, yeah. So it doesn't need to be there. So what we've got is D flat, D natural, sorry, start again, D flat again, and then when it goes over to the next bar, this would not be D flat, this would be D natural, because it would be automatically be cancelled out. If I wanted that one to be a D flat, I would have to reflatten it. So in the next bar, everything goes back to the way it was. It's sort of like the bar line sort of wipes the slate clean. And if you want anything else, you have to put it in that bar. but everything that is altered within one bar exists for that entire bar, unless
Right.
you change it or anything like that. Does that answer the
So
question?
just to be clear, that's only ever one bar that applies to,
Yeah.
unless you, and I know this is later on, unless you change the signature.
Yes. Yeah. That's next week. That's next week. But yeah, that's how sharps and flats and naturals work. Now I've digressed a little bit there. You don't. This isn't information that you need to know for the worksheet, but it is information that something you need to know that will become more apparent later on. But yeah, that's basically the mechanics of sharps and flats. Now this rule applies to all notes. So if we go, I don't know, let's take the bass clef G here, the bottom line on the bass clef. So if I want G flat there, so that's going to be there. Okay, it's going to be that note there. So the original note was a G, but it's been flattened, so it's down one semitone. So that is the note that would be played. Does anybody have any more questions before I move on?
Danny,
Yes, Graham.
when you're in the bar, you said the first one, if the beat, the flattening before the note, so it flattens that note.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, is it every note in that bar flattened? Well, even when it's a different note.
Oh, no, that's a good question. No, it's only the note that you apply the flat or sharp to that is flattened.
Right.
Yeah. So if I have, if I change this to a B, I'm not going to have D flat and then B flat.
No,
I'm going to have
that's the natural.
Yeah, it's just going to be the natural note. Yeah. So if I wanted to change that, I would have to add an accidental to that note.
Yes.
And also another good point is, this is something that really confused me when I was learning. Actually, I used to think that if that D was flattened, then that must mean that D is flattened as well. But it's not the case. Yeah. If you have a D, two Ds like an octave apart, that D there is not flattened. You have to specifically flatten that D if you want it to be flat. But that caught me out for the best part of a year until someone corrected me and I made myself look like an idiot. But there we are. Okay, that was a long time ago. So I'm going to move on now to the major scale. Now, the major scale, like I said before, is the building blocks of Western music as we know it. Everything comes from the major scale. Historically, the major scale wasn't widely used for a very, very long time. So what they had before the major scale and the minor scale tonalities sort of became more popular, proceeding over other types of tonalities, they had what they called modes. Church modes. Some of you may be familiar with that word, what church modes are. If you've ever heard like a Gregorian chant or plain chant by monks, you'll know the sound of modes. It kind of sounds medieval, Renaissance type sort of style. Now I'm not going to go into modes because they're a completely different thing. But just know that the major scale and the minor scale tonalities, they come from modes, and they are what are most prevalent today across the world. Now then, there are, like I said, there's lots of different types of scales, okay? So I'm going to name a few types of scale for you and play them, and you might recognize them. So we've got, the first one is a major scale, okay? That's a major scale sound with the chord there. Second type is a minor scale sound. Okay, that's a minor tonality. We've got a blues scale. Yeah, you might be familiar with that sound. That's a blues scale. The next one we've got is a bebop scale. You might be familiar with this. Yeah, there are a few different altered ways of playing that scale. We've got a whole tone scale, which I've already touched on. Okay, which is just made up of whole tone intervals. We've got the modes, which I'm not going to go into at all. I'm just be aware that they exist. Chromatic scales I've already touched on, which is a collection of semitone, semitone, semitone. Pentatonic scales, which is a scale containing 5 notes only. It's a really nice sound. Yeah. Little tip for you: if you play all the black notes on a piano one after another, it gives you a pentatonic scale. That's the type of scale that it is. And there's another type called the Classmate Scale, which you might be familiar with, which is like which occurs in Jewish music. You get that sort of unmistakable sound of Jewish music and klezmer music. So as you can see there, depending on in which way you order the notes and what semitones and tones that you use, you can create completely different sound worlds and very distinct and individual sounding melodies just from using a certain type of scale. Now then, let's have a look and see if I can find mine. There we are. So this is a C major scale now. This is what a major scale looks like. Can you all see that okay? It's a little bit big, isn't it? There we are. So that is a C major scale, starting on C and ascending by step all the way up to the next C, and then descending by step all the way down to the C where it started. Okay. Now, generally, scales tend to go from the starting pitch, whatever that might be, C, D, E, whatever, it doesn't matter, it can be any pitch. And then it goes to the same pitch an octave above, and then it comes back down. That's usually how scales are played, sung, etc. If you want to go further than 1 octave, that's possible too. So you can go, if I play this for you now. Okay, that's ascending and descending 1 octave. I can go 2 octaves. So essentially what happens is when I get to the C above, I just carry on going and the pattern repeats again. And then descending. Okay, and you can do that an infinite number of times. You can go all the way. That's a 4 octave scale. You could have 5, 6, 7 octaves, however many keys there are in your octaves there are on your instrument. I mean, if you can sing 7 octaves, then you know that's great. You can do that. That's how scales work. It's a repeating pattern over the span of an octave. Now, the major scale itself has a very specific formula to make it a major scale. So we're going to look at that formula now. The major scale formula is this. Okay, so we'll have a good look at that. As you can see, it's entitled Tones and Semitones in a Major Scale. Now remember that any sort of scale is made up of a mixture of tones and semitones. Now, a major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, in this case we're doing the C major scale, so called because it starts on C and ends on C, the C major scale. It starts on C and we move up a tone to D. And then we move up another tone to E. And then from there, we go up a semitone to F. And we go up another tone to G, another tone to A, another tone to B, and then to finish we go up a semitone to C. Okay, so what we get is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, or TTS, TTTS. And that is the major scale formula. You can play, if You start on any note on the keyboard and play that formula, ascending over the course of an octave, you will get a major scale. So I'll do C major. Without the blue, please. Oh, no. Wait a second, where's that gone? It's disappeared again. There we are. So, are you still on there? There we are. You just have to stay blue for now. C. Up a tone. Difference between those is a tone. D to E. Difference is a tone. E to F. That's a semitone. F to G. That's a tone. G to A. That's a tone. A to B. Tone. B to C. Semitone. Now, it's worth noting also that the first note in the scale is not an interval. So it moves from the C to the D. That's your first interval. C to D is a tone, not a tone on C. And then, so don't go tone, 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 semitone, tone, 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 if you get what I mean. Always start from C to D, the first two notes. Let's pick another random note.
D major.
Okay, D major. Cheers, Duncan. Save me a couple of seconds thinking time there. So let's start on D. A tone up from D is going to be, anyone?
E.
E. Thank you, Graham. Okay, and a tone up from E is going to be what?
F sharp.
F sharp. There. A tone up, a semitone up from F sharp is going to be what?
G.
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 Yeah. A tone up from G will be
A.
A. A tone up from that will be
C.
B. And a tone up from that
Yeah.
C sharp.
D. Yep.
And then a semitone up from there D. So those are the notes of the D major scale, and here it is. So we use that major scale formula: tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, and it gave us a major scale, the scale of D major. This applies to all notes. Let's build one, okay? So we'll do the scale of D major again. We'll start with, we'll do it in semi-briefs, one note per bar. So we start on D. And remember, we went up. So we went up a tone, we landed on E. And then we went up a tone again, we landed on F sharp. We went up a semitone, we landed on G. A tone from there, A. A tone from there, B. Another tone, landed us on C sharp. And a semitone landed us back at D, an octave above the first D. So there's a D major scale written out. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Okay. Now then, what else was I going to say? Oh, it's escaping me.
Whilst you're thinking about that, I've just been playing that on my piano here, and you know you've got it right because it just sounds right.
Just sounds right, yeah. It sounds right. It will, yeah. You'll know. Usually, you can figure them out by ear if you know the sound of the major scale and you know it really well. And by now you should, because I mean, if you play an instrument or sing, which you know most of you are instrumentalists or singers, you'll have been singing the major scale your entire lives, and it will be sort of ingrained in you, whether you know it or not. So you will know if a note sounds off. Yeah, so that's how you build a major scale. So with that, was there anything else that I needed to cover? 2 seconds. Let me just have a look. There was one other thing that I needed to cover, but it's very short. there is a thing called an enharmonic equivalent. Now, an enharmonic equivalent, as you can see there, it says itself enharmonics. An enharmonic equivalent means when the note F and the notes F sharp and the notes G flat are the same note. So if I take an F here and I make it an F sharp, that note can also be known as G flat. G flat. You can see how they both land on the same note. The same would go for like A. So if I do A sharp, I would land there. And if I did B flat, I would also land there. And those are called enharmonic equivalents. You can see here. That's how they work. So some scales use the same notes as other scales, but they're called flats rather than sharps. Or some use sharps rather than flat, and vice versa, you know. There are scales that use, scales either use only flats or only sharps. They will never use a mixture of the two. Only sharps or only flats. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing at the moment. So I'm going to go on to the worksheet now, this week's worksheet, and talk you through it. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like me to answer before I do that? Okay, so let's go on. No, we don't want the answers, do we? Here is the worksheet for this week. I'm going to talk you through it in full detail. So, the first thing to do is to write in the major scale formula. Now, you've been given here a C major scale. Okay? The first note has got an X underneath it because you don't count the first note as an interval. So really, what you want to be doing is writing maybe put brackets around the notes like that to show what the interval is between two notes. So, for instance, C to D is going to be a tone. So just write a T underneath it with a bracket round like that. T, T, yeah. Try to memorize the major scale formula, it'd be really useful. Next thing to do is to just identify the notes. Just show us what they are and write them underneath. The next thing to do is to write out a scale of F major and a scale of G major. Now remember, the scale of F major, it's called F major because it starts and ends on F. So I would advise you to start that F there. And with the G major scale, I'd advise you to start on this G line here. Each of these scales will have one accidental in them, either one sharp or one flat. I'll tell you, F major has one flat in it, and G major has one sharp in it. So good luck with that. Use the major scale formula to work that out. Next thing to do is to write, so you see the note here, so for instance this is a C. I want you to write in here, just next to it, a C sharp. So a semitone above. And for this one, I'd want you to write a semitone above that one. And then for the next one, 4B, it's just the opposite, semitone below, using flats. Remember, the flat sign or the sharp sign goes before the note, as you can see there. Okay. I've just remembered what it was that I was going to say. In a scale, in any given scale, you can only use one note once. Each letter name in the scale once. So you cannot have a scale that goes F, I'll start with C. You can't have a scale that goes C, D, D, E, F, F, G, or C, D, E, F, F sharp, G, or something like that. You have to only use each letter name once in the scale, apart from at either end, so C to C, for instance. So there we are. Now I appreciate that this is probably a little bit more complex than we've been doing so far. You have these, the video and everything like that to go back over. And by the way, if anyone's struggling or anything like that, send me a quick email if you're really struggling with it and you just can't get your head around it, send me a quick email and I'll do my best to help you understand what's going on. So don't be afraid to get in touch with me. It's fine. I've got time for everyone.
Annie, when you say video, do you mean on YouTube or I mean on YouTube? Yeah. I would definitely need that. Yeah.
I do also send this video out with an email as well. But last week, a few people said that they couldn't open the folder or something. But what I'll do is I'll send it out again this week in email, just in case it was a blip or something like that. But there are two. You'll have two sort of, you'll have the YouTube videos and you'll have one in your email as well. Okay. So there we are.